And welcome to the Ramp Up to Retirement podcast with your host, Dan Reese. Dan, I really like what you're about to undertake here. It's a series of episodes about exit planning. And the reason I like it so much is that I know guys who own their own businesses, and I've done this a lot. And I don't think people, Dan, really seriously think through this very much. You would certainly be in a much better position to know than I am.
Yeah, this is a great topic. Last year I went through what's called the SEPA training, which is a certified exit planning advisor, and I learned so much. And so what we're going to do is we're actually going to do, I think, probably about 8 episodes around this topic, and we're going to walk through systematically, like the overview of what exit planning really is and what it's not. And I think that for a lot of people out there that own businesses, this can be like an exciting thing, succession planning, but it can also be extremely scary. And so we want to kind of change the perspective on that of how you view it. And we call it, and this comes right from my training as a SEPA, is the value acceleration strategy versus a succession strategy, right?
Yeah.
And you'll see as we talk about this over time, there's a major difference between doing value acceleration versus, hey, I just want to plan a succession, right?
Yeah. Well, and to be fair, when I had a career, and when I looked at retiring from that career, it was simply retiring from something. For business owners, this is a much, much bigger deal than just, well, it's time for me to retire. This is a well, and I know you're going to get into this in subsequent episodes. It's a serious life change. So I don't think a lot of people really think through it, is where I'm trying to get us to. I think they sort of have a plan, but they don't really have a plan.
Yeah, you hear a lot of things like, yeah, I've kind of got an idea what I'm going to do. Like my kids are interested, I've got a partner that might really take over. We've talked a little bit about it over a beer, it's those types of things. Or we'll just figure it out when the time comes. I mean, my business is worth a lot. I know it's worth a lot. And, they say things like that, but it's really very vague, overall.
Yeah.
And I will say, I think part of the reason that's true, and again, we'll get into a lot of these things, but when you think about the overall topic, you're super busy as a business owner. You know what I mean? You're day to day, you're reacting to things, you're trying to plan things. And your time gets eaten up very, very quickly oftentimes. And then you come home and you want to do stuff with your family and friends and other things. So it's like, this definitely takes some effort to basically carve out time to say, hey, I'm going to do this the right way. And what we want to do as we talk through this is give you an idea what the right way might look like, what that might actually entail. So you're not just saying, oh, well, I'm doing some planning. Well, it's like going to the gym with no plan. It's like, yeah, I went to the gym. You're like, well, how'd it go? He's like, I think it went great. I mean, I had fun. So
yeah, well, it was kind of like my visit today. So. But I want to pick up on something you mentioned. You used a phrase I'd not heard before, value acceleration strategy, which, to be honest with you, Dan, sounds a lot like consultant speak. So why don't you put it down for us? And it seems like a good place to start.
Yeah, I mean, the idea of value acceleration is pretty straightforward. So when you think about a business owner, there's really 3 legs of the stool that they need to manage when you're talking about this specific area. One of those areas is just the business, right? Which obviously that's the first one that comes to focus. So when we think of business acceleration, which we'll get into more detail, or value acceleration, excuse me,
Yeah.
Part of the business leg of the stool is making sure that your business is becoming valuable to those that may want to buy it, which we'll talk way more about. But, just because you have a good business doesn't mean it's easily transferable and it may not be worth what you think it is for various reasons, which we'll talk about. But the second leg of the stool then is the financial plan. So like oftentimes what happens, again, because business owners are busy, they don't spend the time with financial planning because they don't really have a lot of financial pain right at the time. The business is doing well. They've got plenty of money to spend.
Yep.
They're putting some money in a retirement account. They're like, oh, we're good. So they don't necessarily sit down and really get into the nitty gritty of their own personal financial plan. And then the last piece of that the third leg of the stool is the personal plan, which we're actually talking about that in depth in an episode. But the personal plan, believe it or not, is where a lot of people struggle. And it's that idea, that concept of, if I'm not running a business, what does my life look like? What does my day to day look like? Because there's a lot of hours in the week, and we want to make sure that, if you step away from a business, you have a fulfilling life that you're going to have passion about and really enjoy. But if any one of those legs is not working, you got problems, because it's basically gonna collapse your stability, in your long-term planning. So that's the big thing, is we just want to make sure that we're dealing with each of those things as we go along.
Yeah. So give us an example of a weak leg.
There's like a good example: strong business, weak financial plan, right? Owner doesn't really know what they need. So, like, I'll give you just a quick stat. Typically, most business owners have upwards of 80% of their wealth within their business. And so many times, and they kind of forget about all the value they get out of that on an annual basis. They may have a car that's paid for by the business, like a lot of things like cell phones and maybe some of their insurance and all these things that people that work for companies are more aware of, because they're paying it out of their own money versus out of a business many times. And so, like, they don't really understand, hey, that lack of a financial plan, what kind of impact that can have, in how much you need from the business if you were to get rid of it, right? Another one is, strong financial plan, weak business. So what makes a business weak? It's not necessarily how much money it makes. And that's the first thing that comes to mind, is like, oh, a struggling business.
Hmm.
You can have a business that's doing very well, but, there could be things around it that make it not very attractive to somebody that would want to buy it, right? You could have concentrated businesses or business, with a few customers. You could have a small leadership team. You could have an owner that really is the business, right? So if they leave, somebody else is like, well, I don't really have a business. If Joe leaves, Joe is the business, right? And then another simple example is a strong, like strong business and financial plan, but weak personal planning. And that's the case where you got all the money you needed out of it. You knew what you needed. You were able to sell a business for that, but then you didn't know what to do with yourself, and you're miserable, right? And so it's like, and that happens more times than you can imagine.
I know a guy who was like, "Hey, you know what? There's only so much golf I can play. I thought I could play a lot more golf
Yeah.
than this." And it's like, yeah, there's this. I don't want to call it a rude awakening, but there is an awakening for some owners when they exit their business, that the business meant a whole lot more to them psychologically, emotionally, than they thought it did.
Yeah. I think you see that a lot, because you think of, like, in some regards, that's who they are. They build it from the ground up. They came in, and, like, when that business started, they did everything. They were the mail room, they were the phone answerer, they were doing all these things.
Right.
And so there's a lot of, like, pride and ownership of that over time. And that's one of the reasons privately owned businesses tend to outperform publicly owned businesses, is because of that pride, and it's a great thing. But you come into work, you build it, people look up to you, they come to you for answers. It's a big thing. You're very, well respected and important in that landscape. And if you leave, that can really be tough. So, for sure.
So let's get into what can be a sticky topic, I think, Dan, for a lot of owners. I've heard guys say, "Yeah, I'm gonna, I think I'm done. I'm gonna look around and I'm gonna sell my business," and they think that it's like a 6 month deal and then they're out and they're done. And that's really not the case. Starting earlier, having some intention makes a big difference, doesn't it?
It does. And so, what you want to do is you want to kind of start at the end, and you say, if somebody comes in to buy your business, right?
Hmm.
If you were going to buy a business, let's look at an optimal situation. An optimal situation is that you could buy a business that was almost turnkey, where you walked in, that owner could walk out the door, and it was run so well they didn't even have to be there for it to really be successful. They had a great leadership team, good reoccurring revenue, good diversified client base. So the risk was low. They had depth in their management. So if somebody left, or something happened, or they passed away, there were other people that could step in, right? And so that's ideal, right? That's the type of business somebody would want to buy if that
Sure.
was the case.
That's the dream business, right?
Right. Now let's back up a minute though and look at a lot of family owned businesses. That stuff may occur to some degree, but I would say without question, most businesses could improve in those areas, right? They could improve their processes. They could improve their reoccurring revenue. Things like, well, you see it all the time nowadays. What do we do with Netflix? We pay a monthly fee, right? It's a reoccurring revenue. Where the old days, we'd go to the movie or whatever it might be, we'd pay for that visit, but we didn't pay every month for it, right? So reoccurring revenue is very important as you're selling a business. But as we go down this, you got to think through that doesn't happen overnight. If you've got to improve procedures, if you want to do more training to have a deeper management team, if you want to get the owner as much out of the business as possible so it can run without them, those are all things that take time. And so we can't just flip a switch and be like, oh, let's do that. It takes time, it takes expertise. There's actually value acceleration experts to come in and help business owners do those types of things,
Oh, really?
to begin to implement those things.
Yeah.
And so there's a process you can follow. But let's face it, if you've got like a longer runway, you would be shocked what the research shows of how much you can improve the value of your business. And that's what it's about. That's a value acceleration. So now it's worth more. And the other thing is that I will tell you is when you think of value acceleration within that business, the other thing it does, it reduces risk to the buyer. So you as the seller, oftentimes you're going to get more upfront. Like, because if there's more risk, they're going to do more like, what are called earnouts, different things like that. They want to make sure the business is actually going to perform before they give you all the money. But if it's really running well and it's got all the things we talked about, that changes everything. And they're like, hey, I'll give you more upfront because guess what? There's going to be a lot of buyers that are interested in your business when you have that type of situation.
Yeah, yeah, and I would imagine that an independent evaluation would be of great help to you in that kind of situation because it would help identify these areas that you're talking about. And because, a lot of people, they run their business, it's doing well. I don't think they necessarily think in terms of I mean, look, a lot of people do think about reoccurring revenue and things like that, but, they don't necessarily think about the leadership team. They don't think about how am I replaceable in this business and that kind of thing, right?
Yeah, I do think because we're running again very hard as a business owner. So you don't really think through all those details. You look at the bottom line, like, we're doing great, right?
Yeah.
But what a good business evaluation is going to do is it's going to kind of give you, I would call it like a benchmark. So think of it this way. When you're looking at your business and you're doing that initial view of it, you're going to look and say, okay, what are the best in our business? How are they positioned? What are their values? What do they do? All these types of things. And then a benchmark is just like we do in anything. How are we doing with our business compared to the best out there? Right. And so we're doing is we're trying to grade ourselves across several areas, like we just talked about. What is our customer concentration, right? What is our reoccurring revenue? Do we have long-term contracts in place, or are we kind of one-offs that could be very volatile? What do our numbers look like month to month? Are they all over the place, or are they very consistent? Because if you're the buyer, and always want to put yourself in the buyer's shoes, right? If you're the buyer, that's what you're going to look at as you identify those things. But it really helps you as a business owner if you can handle it, because it's hard. It's hard to grade yourself.
It's why people have coaches. It's why people have personal coaches. It's why they have business coaches because it's hard. It's particularly hard to see your own blind spots.
100%. There is no question. And that's kind of like our next discussion point is blind spots. And I would tell you 100% the biggest blind spot is they don't really understand those numbers.
Mm.
Most business owners. There are some that do. There are some that are great at it. And there are there's great tools out there today to number one, take kind of a subjective view of yourself where you can kind of grade yourself, where it'll ask through, we've got tools like that has you go through about some of these different areas and you can kind of grade yourself as to how you sit there.
It increases your self-awareness, it sounds like what you're saying.
Right. And then there's also objective tools that can help you. Where do you sit and what do you think, what do they think people would be willing to pay for your business in its current state? And so what's important about that and why it's such a big blind spot is that if you don't know the value of your business and you don't understand how you measure up against the competitors out there, how can you get better? How can you improve, right? It's very difficult to improve if you don't even know where you are. It's like going on vacation and you need to get to Florida, but I have no idea where I am right now. Like, how do I get there?
I don't have a map, but I've got an idea of where it is, so we'll just take off.
Right. And then the second part of it, which kind of flows into the blind spot with not knowing your business valuation, is not knowing how much you need it to be worth to maintain your current lifestyle. Right. So, like, sometimes you get a big surprise and you're like, well, as a business owner, actually, if I take all that stuff out of the business that I use towards really my personal life, and there's can be a lot of things like we talked about, cars, insurance, like all kinds of things.
Yep.
If I add all that in, plus all my regular business expenses, and I need 500,000 a year to maintain that, you need to understand, well, what does that mean? How much do I need my business to be worth if I take that goal of what I need less what I have personally, things like my liquid net worth and retirement accounts and things like that. What is that gap between those two things? So, like, it could be, I've got to sell my company for $5 million, because if I don't, my gap is not going to be filled and my life's going to change dramatically. And so that blind spot exists almost, universally across the many, many family owned businesses.
Yeah, yeah, and it's interesting that you brought that. You bring up how much do you need, because I've heard stories about people saying, how much do I need? Well, I think it's probably, I think I can get probably 6 million for this. And then people they're working with, they're like, well, let's break this down. Let's take a look at this exactly. And they go, well, wait, your car's coming through, your health insurance, or your vacations. You're paying for your vacations through this. You're taking, and they are shocked when they realize what kind of value they've been taking from the business on a routine basis because they're used to doing it. And then they suddenly realize, whoa, man, $6 million isn't going to be nearly enough for what I need.
You're absolutely right. Like, you see it a lot. And I've talked to CPAs about this, especially in businesses that maybe aren't as established. They will look, at the end of the year and they're like, I didn't make that much money. Like, they'll look at their profit and loss, what they don't realize, because what they're looking at is they'll say things like, there should be a lot more money in my business checking account if I made that much. Well, what they forget is, oh, in February, you took out 10 grand for a vacation that you didn't really count. You know what I mean? And then you bought a car, and then you paid some tuition out of that. And so they look at their paycheck and don't really go back and add up all the things where they took draws throughout the year.
Hmm.
And that's kind of what you're talking about. And that doesn't even include, all the stuff that what you were essentially, it pays for my car insurance, or actually it pays for my car. I got a company car,
Yeah.
and all those things are reality. And so sitting back and looking at it and saying objectively, what is my true economic value out of this company and how much do I need to continue to make? So we always take a really simple, and this isn't perfect, but it gives people a rough idea, right? So, like, if they're looking at, say for example, they lived on $500,000 a year, right? So if you divide that by 5%, which we're just given like a simple kind of distribution rule, like a 5% distribution rule. This is very high level. This is not designed to be a financial planning, class or anything. But the point is, that's $10 million. Like, if you want $500,000 a year, you need $10 million net worth, basically, if you will, or liquid net worth, to produce that consistently over time. And I think a lot of people think, whoa, I didn't realize that.
Hmm.
Right. And so that blind spot is real. Like, and so this, I want to back up a little bit. So we talked about the blind spot and not understanding that company value. Well, what if you get a value number and you also get your benchmark score shows that you're pretty far down as far as what your business could be worth if you improved these areas, right? You improved your customer concentration, reduced that. You know what I mean? You improved your management, you improved your processes,
Understood.
all these things. Then all of a sudden, your company could possibly have the same sales, but your profitability goes up and your value to outside buyers goes up. So that goes back to like that runway, having a longer runway to be able to change it, change where you are. But you can't change, you can change things, but if you don't know where you are, it's hard to even start. So we always talk about people, the very first thing always when you're looking at all this stuff is get your business valuation done.
Yeah, no, no, no. It makes complete sense. And for people who are listening to this who are maybe owners of businesses themselves and they're not ready to sell, what should they be thinking about and what should they do at this point, Dan?
Yeah, I think the thing is, again, we're going to back up almost to where we started, right? So let's get back to the three-legged stool when you think about being a business owner. So if you can be truly honest with yourself and really look at it and say, okay, let me take a look at my business, my personal financial planning, and my personal plan. And let's be really honest with ourselves. Where are we in those areas, right? And I think most people would say I can improve. And I think it's like a lot of things. If you're honest with yourself almost about anything, you're not where you should be. Everybody can always get better. There's always improvement that can be made. And so when you think through that, first of all, reflect on those things. And then number one, start with a business valuation, right? There's a lot, you can get them done very reasonably. I mean, in the grand scheme of things, like a good business evaluation, not just oh, I think it's worth about this. I'm not talking about just a rough, put your finger in the air and be like, oh, I think it's worth, like you said, 4 million, like a real business
Not a
evaluation.
guess.
Yeah, and maybe that costs $5,000 or $6,000, but it's great money spent because you really can get an accurate picture of maybe where you are today, right? The second thing is get with a certified financial planner and start looking at where are you right now? Where does your wealth reside? Are you the typical business owner where 80% of it's in, outside of your personal wealth? And if that's the case, like understand that and understand what you're going to need, right? Like, people like me, like I'm a business owner too. So I understand really well, like, things that maybe I would have to replace if I didn't own the business as far as paying for those on my own.
Yeah, it's funny. It's funny you said that, Dan, because I was going to say this topic is more than just objective for you. It's personal because you're a business owner. So
Yeah, 100%. And then the last thing you think about is that personal plan. And there's some great tools out there. And we're going to talk in depth in the next episode about personal planning specifically. But my point being is that you have to have a plan for how you're going to fill your hours, how you're going to replace that passion you had for your business. And there's a lot of things you can do. But what I would tell you is that, there's a good personal planner that I listen to, and I listened to one of her podcasts. And I believe if I get this right, the terms could be a little off, but basically she says there's like hedonistic activities and altruistic activities, and it sounds a little rough, but the reality is like things like hedonistic's more like doing stuff just for you. Like I'm going golfing or I'm doing this trip where altruistic are things where you're maybe giving back a little more and being more community driven and helping others.
uh-huh.
And she really she talks about the importance of that balance, because she's like, you need to have activities that are just for you. You need to go have fun and do some things you like, but you also need to spend time, just like when you were a business owner, leading. That's one of your best traits generally if you build a successful business is you're a good leader.
It's interesting. I mean, basically, what you're saying is if you don't take a look at it, you don't measure it. You not measure it with the finger in the air, but if you don't actually measure it, you can't accelerate it. You don't know where you're going, and that probably is the theme that will run through this entire series. Take a look at what you've got and know what you've got, right?
Yep. I will tell you, that's absolutely true.
So, as we wrap this episode up, Dan, are there any last couple of points you want to make or last few words before we say goodbye?
Yeah, my big thing is don't get overwhelmed with this stuff. You know what I mean? Take it one thing at a time. And like I really mentioned at the closing there is that get a business evaluation. And if you don't know how to do that, reach out to us. We have resources we can get you in touch with that can do that. We're not affiliated. So just so you know, I'm not selling anything. I'm like, there's just people that we know that can do those types of things that will give you a good idea where you stand and then meet with a certified financial planner, right? That's the first two things. Start building those two legs of the stool. And then the personal planning is the third leg that takes some work. And when you're married with a family, it takes extra work because it's not just you, right? It's other people that are around, which we'll talk more about.
So how do they get a hold of you, Dan?
Yeah, the best thing to do, honestly, we actually have a lot of really good business owner resources on our website. So if you go to our website, there's a whole area of educational material, and there's a section on business planning. There's business owner succession, like planning checklists. There's all kinds of things that you can look at. And there's also just a lot of stuff on regular retirement planning. When you think of that personal side of it, that would be helpful. So check that out. There's a contact us right on our website, averywealth.com. You could click on that. We'll reach back out and get you any resources that you need, anything referenced in here, or just answer any questions you have. So look forward to meeting business owners out there that are trying to get better. So.
Excellent. And if you are one of those owners and you don't already have a relationship with Dan, I would encourage you to reach out to him and at least talk to him. There's no obligation involved with having a conversation with Dan. And you might learn a couple of things, and you might decide you want to have a relationship, as a matter of fact. But that's up to you. The other thing you can do, if you're not a subscriber already, hit the subscribe button, because then you will get notified every time Dan drops a new episode, particularly as a part of this series, which you will find really interesting and I think extremely useful for you as well. And if you don't mind, give it a like. Let people know you like it. Word of mouth promotion is irreplaceable, quite frankly. And we would thank you for that. So until next time, I'm Bill Tucker. On behalf of Dan and everybody at Avery Wealth, thank you so much for taking the time to listen today. We'll catch you next time. Thank you for listening to Ramp Up Your Retirement. Click the follow button to be notified when new episodes become available. Visit our website at www.averywealth.com or give us a call at 517-783-1695. And don't forget to click the follow button to be notified when new episodes become available. The information covered and posted represents the views and opinions of the guest and does not necessarily represent the views or opinions of Avery Wealth. The content has been made available for informational and educational purposes only. The content is not intended to be a substitute for professional investing advice. Always seek the advice of your financial advisor or other qualified financial service provider with any questions you may have regarding your investment planning. The opinions voiced in Ramp Up to Retirement with Dan Reese are for general information only and are not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations for any individual. To determine what may be appropriate for you, consult with your attorney, accountant, financial, or tax advisor prior to investing. Guests on the show may not be affiliated with CWM LLC. Views and comments by guests may not be representative of CWM LLC. Investment advisory services are offered through CWM LLC, an SEC-registered investment advisor. Carson Partners, a division of CWM LLC, is a nationwide partnership of advisors.